What's happening in Saudi Arabia is potentially very good news. It could mean the end of a war in which perhaps a million Ukrainians have died or been wounded gravely up until now. This is a war that never should have happened. It came about because of several provocative U.S. actions over 30 years, notably the expansion of NATO eastward against commitments made back in 1990, the U.S. participation in a violent coup in Ukraine in February 2014, the U.S.-Ukraine agreement to discard a UN Security Council-backed Minsk II agreement, and the failure of the Biden administration to negotiate with President Putin in December 2021 and January 2022. I was personally involved in watching closely all of those events over the past 30 years. This war never should have happened. It could have been averted at many times. It could have ended in negotiation in March 2022, saving the lives of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. I urged it. The Ukrainians walked away from the table because the British and the Americans told them to. This is so tragic, and everyone will understand this as the historians make all of this very clear. I flew to Ankara in the spring of 2022 to understand exactly how these negotiations had broken down. And the United States and Britain were behind it because, as Keith Starmer said in the clip that you played, this is about Europe's security. They're using Ukraine. This is the bottom line. So what's happening, in short, in Saudi Arabia is the most positive news for Ukrainians that there has been in years. President Trump understands, and unfortunately, previous presidents did not, that the U.S. provocations need to stop so this war stops, so the deaths stop. That is the bottom line. I think it's important for everybody to understand also that on October 5th, 2022, Zelensky ruled out any negotiations. He said it's illegal. This was a declaration of the Ukrainian government. So the government of Ukraine, sadly, really unwisely, I've tried many, many times to explain to them, they ruled out negotiations. They ruled them out until today. This is tragic for them. Now they say, we want a seat at the table. They said, we don't want any table all along. And Zelensky rules by martial law, by decree, when the opinion surveys show that a majority of Ukrainians want peace right now, even at the cost of territorial concessions. So my bottom line, Amy, is that while the Trump administration does some pretty weird things like demanding mineral rights, this is absurd. This is completely bizarre. At the same time, the Trump administration, for the first time, is telling the truth about the fundamental causes of this war and how it can end. And that is the best news possible for Ukraine, first and foremost, and for the United States, for Russia, and for the world, that peace could come to Ukraine very, very shortly. So this, I think, is the bottom line.
Yeah, I'd like to bring in Matt Dussin to the conversation. Matt, your reaction to the events and the Trump administration's complete reversal of the previous administration's policy, and this whole issue of whether there could have been peace earlier on, but that the Biden administration and the British scuttled the developing peace plan back 2 years ago.
Well, I mean, first off, and again, great to be with you and great to be here with Professor Sachs. I mean, I think, you know, the story that Professor Sachs just told, there are elements of truth to it, but there are also, it's a great deal in there that's misleading and frankly completely one-sided. absolving Vladimir Putin of any responsibility. Vladimir Putin is the one who chose to invade Ukraine, let's remember. It's important to understand the history. Important to understand that the role that NATO expansion has played as being seen as a threat to Russia, that is real. That, however, does not explain Vladimir Putin's decision to illegally invade, annex, and occupy parts of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin himself has told us multiple times what his vision for Ukraine is, and that's to retake Ukraine and make it once again part of the larger Russian imperium. So again, important to understand the historical context, but I would really warn against seeing, Vladimir Putin as some kind of innocent victim of American machinations here, which is the story that Professor Sachs seems to be trying to tell. And lastly, it really denies the Ukrainians any agency, any responsibility for their own independence, for their own democracy. The Ukrainians are not simply being treated as instruments of American power here. The Ukrainians have made decisions on their own. Some of them have been wise, some of them very admirable, some of them less so. I think we can discuss that as well. But they have played a major role here, and I think that is what's concerning about these talks going on in Saudi Arabia, is that they're not included, and they have said, President Zelensky has said, that they will not be bound by any decisions made without their participation, which I think we can all agree is quite a legitimate position. Now, having said that, this is not the first time you've had a U.S. administration engaging with the government of Vladimir Putin. Of course, President Biden met with Putin in June 2021. They had a summit trying to address some issues of tension in the U.S.-Russia relationship. And I think this also goes to the point that President Biden did not seek a conflict with Russia. There were efforts made to avert the invasion. There was very intensive diplomacy between the U.S. and Russia, also between the U.S.'s allies, Germany, France, UK, and Russia, leading up to the February 2022 invasion. And I think it's worth taking that into account. Now, should more have been done? Perhaps. We can't know, but I think Vladimir Putin has told us repeatedly about his very expansive goals and what he really hopes to achieve in Ukraine. And it's not just about NATO. I mean, this should not be news to anyone here. Again, getting back to the talks in Saudi Arabia, if there is a workable peace agreement to be had, that's good. But I do think even the fact that these talks are happening between the United States and Russia, that is a victory for Putin. We have to understand that. Putin's vision for Russia's role and for the eventual dispensation for Ukraine is that this is something to be worked out between Russia and the United States, between these two great powers. He sees Russia as a rising force. Again, he's trying to kind of reestablish Russia as a great empire, a great force in global affairs. And his vision of how global affairs should work is that the great powers make decisions and the lesser powers just have to deal with it. Their concerns are of very little concern. And unfortunately, I think that is something we've seen from the Trump administration too, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza. It's that the powerful make decisions and the weak just deal with it. I don't think that's just, and more importantly, I don't think that's going to lead to a sustainable peace. So listen, if they do come out of these talks with a workable and sustainable and durable peace agreement for Ukraine, one that protects Ukraine's democracy, one that protects Ukraine's sovereignty, we should all support that. But without the participation of Ukraine, I'm very, very skeptical that we're going to get anything like that.